My name's Ben Benson. I'm a practicing farrier from Oxfordshire, and I'm currently president of the British Farriers and Blacksmiths Association.
You know, the very essence of the mental game is this. The only reason an event matters is because we make it matter.
Welcome to the Mullins Farrier Podcast.
Every horse, whatever it was doing, had a season. Once their competition season finished, they took the shoes off, they chucked it out in the field with some other horses, and it had a 2, maybe 3 months period where it went and remembered what being a horse was all about.
Even in a cheaper area, your prices should be set by your skill level, by your experience. And some people might not feel that they're worth, as much as others. But if you're only charging $160 to shoe a horse, then the only way you're making money is on your trims.
The WCB was a way to make sure that you kept the trade alive. I think I'm a custodian of the trade, so it's like we have to keep it going.
It was hard, but you adapt and overcome, and that probably gets to me where I am now. It's problem solving, horseshoeing's problem solving, and back in the day it was problem solving how to be as strong as the older apprentice is. So it's all about adapting and overcoming, which was good.
I know we learn every day, but you do have to put yourself outside the box and just continue to learn, which is why I was just trying to do my fellowship, because I still have apprentices, and if I stay at my AW, I'm stagnant.
Welcome, everyone. A little shopkeeping before we start. The weekend of the 17th to the 19th of May is going to be a busy one in the farrier world. The Keep 'em Ringin' benefit clinic honoring Scott Collier is being held in Mount Vernon, Virginia, and there is an all-star list of clinicians participating in this one. Craig Trenka, Austin Edens, Hank Chisholm, Daniel Jones, Carl Villa, Justin Decker, Travis Burns, and Scott Fleming. Contact Steve with any questions. 703-851-4373. And on the same weekend, the legendary Chris Gregory is coming to my neck of the woods for the Ontario Farriers Association's Spring Clinic, where he will be leading a 2-day clinic with demos and lectures. Chris is also going to host a hands-on forging clinic on the Sunday. This is a great opportunity for all of you who've been thinking about heading down to the Heartland for one of their workshops I'm always raving about. You can get a taste of how much this incredible educator can teach you and help you improve. Go to ontariofarriers.ca for details and registration. Today's guest has played an important role in having me over to Stoneleigh the past couple of years, so I could interview farriers from across the pond, promote the BFBA's Focus convention, and of course, spend some quality time with my podcast bro, Danny Bennett. As you will hear, Ben is a busy man with a lot of irons in the fire. From his position as a consultant for Team GB and one of the lead farriers for the London, Rio, and Tokyo Olympics, to his tenure as the president of the BFBA, working with his talented team to grow the BFBA Focus into its largest event ever in 2023, and his work running his farrier practice near Banbury in Oxfordshire. He's a hard man to pin down for any length of time. It only took me 2 trips across the pond in order to snag him for an hour and have this conversation. One of the highlights for me is when we really dig into his thoughts on shoeing the hind feet of performance horses for their various disciplines. The result was a lot of practical takeaways and concepts to ponder. Ben's time spent under the tutelage of Haydn Price, as well as his tenure working as a consultant for Team GB, has offered him a very unique vantage point to see these concepts at work in the real world. Anyway, I learned a lot from this gentleman, and I hope you too enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Which must be quite the job.
It is, yeah. It certainly taught me a lot about myself. You realise trying to organise farriers is like herding cats. It really is. It's the second term of my presidency now. It's been an amazing roller coaster. Definitely, I think working for the association as well as my own job. Yeah, I've really learned a huge amount about myself and things I didn't know before about the industry. It's been really enlightening, and getting to meet so many people as well.
Yeah, I bet. As somebody who isn't aware of how those things progress, did you work for the BFBA and other factions and then just kind of work your way up to president, or how does it work here?
Yeah, I joined the executive about 10 years ago
Okay.
and sort of came in as some pushy, wet behind the ears farrier that wanted to help and wanted to make a difference and make things better. And the first Focus I came to, the guys put me on the Facebook, and we went from 1,500 followers and likes to sort of 2,500. We managed to get, I think it was about 300 people come to the first one. It's been a roller coaster ever since, and here we are now with 800 pre-booked tickets and the biggest farrier convention in Europe. When we started, it was 5 tents around the side of the forge, and it was something that we did to bring farriers whilst the international was going. It's pretty amazing.
No kidding. So what made you aim towards this? Clearly you saw that there was a potential there.
I don't know. I think I'm one of those people in my career. I've always sort of gravitated towards events and coordinating and stuff like that. You go in and you see something that could be so much better again, and you've got the burning desire to do it. And I think I'm probably quite a driven person in my goals and objectives. Other things that I've done along the way, that sort of planning and organising and activation of, an event, I really enjoy it. It just sort of fell into it, and I've probably used those skills in other things I've done and vice versa. It's pretty amazing. I mean, we're really fortunate now with Holly Flack, who starts. Yeah, I mean, she's got it in a headlock and she's got it gripped. So
no kidding.
Yeah, we just come along and do what we're told now and get our jobs. Before it was literally 5 of us doing this while we were shoeing horses, selling trade stands and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's grown so much.
No kidding. Even in the 1 year, it's been pretty neat to see.
Yep.
Now, your career, you apprenticed with Haydn, did you not?
Yep.
So there's another very driven person.
Yeah. I was really fortunate. So my father was actually a farrier.
Okay.
So I sort of grew up in and around farriery all my life. Where I come from in West Wales, it's proper backwater. They're lovely people, much slower pace of life. They got their horses shod 3 times a year.
Whether they needed it or not.
Exactly, whether they needed it or not. And one of those was before our national show, where they all show their horses. So we've grown up in and around shoeing and horses. And, from a little kid, used to go shoeing with Dad on weekends and during the holidays. And, he'd get me clattering shoes and banging things and stuff like that. So I've always been around it. And then my mum actually didn't want me to be a farrier because back home again, it's very seasonal. So
right.
In the winter, Dad could go down to 3 or 4 a week. And in the summer, he could be doing 30 or 40. She always wanted me to do something different. So when I finished school, she made me go and do an engineering qualification. So it's the equivalent of our A levels. So a diploma in engineering. I've actually got a City and Guilds in computer aided design, but I can't remember any of it. And I still type with 2 fingers. So I don't know what that gave me, but I did that. And then, I was very fortunate. I really wanted to be a farrier. The trade-off was if I ever get beat up by a horse, I've got a qualification to come back to.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I did my pre-farrier course at Warwick College. Yeah, I was very lucky. Managed to get a trial with Haydn. Yeah, it all sort of started there. And I can't say how thankful I am. Like Haydn gave me that drive and that vision. I turned up there wet behind the ears thinking what I thought shoeing was, and actually learned so much more, about looking at the horse and being a professional and also running the business and all those different avenues that actually I think you need to have.
Yeah.
And then I finished my apprenticeship with Haydn in my 3rd year. I finished with Haydn and then I finished my apprenticeship with Dave Smith, DP Smith. So I went from Haydn, who was doing the performance horses and really he pioneered the gait analysis and all those sorts of things were amazing. Then I went to Dave's and my God, I learned a whole heap more. Dave at that time was doing a lot of competing on the England Farrier team. And that's the point where, as an apprentice, I started doing a lot better competing. I won the national championship when I worked for Dave, and I managed to get on the Wales senior team, actually, when they went to Italy as an apprentice.
Oh, okay.
So, and then I finished my time with Dave. I stayed in the area. It's culturally where I am now. I'm in the Midlands, effectively halfway between Oxford and Birmingham. I carried on freelancing for some farriers when I first started. I was very fortunate. Haydn rang me up when I qualified and said, right, you're going to come and do a couple of days for me.
Okay, yeah.
And then I worked for Nigel Brown. I always knew I needed to keep that momentum of learning.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was really fortunate, not long after qualifying, to pick up one of the British Olympic dressage riders at his yard. 20 years on this week. That was when I first started shoeing for him.
Okay.
I'm still shoeing for him, I'm pleased to say. Yeah. And that really then sparked my burning desire to push myself. I competed quite a bit in my first couple of years of being qualified. And I realized that I needed to seriously up my game. I didn't really have my own workshop at that time. And I was borrowing others, and just, you've got to be all in or all out with competing. And at that point, life, house, all those sort of things I needed to do. But with the sport horse stuff, I found this amazing thing, this nirvana that you'll never beat, working on those horses, where predominantly my work is the dressage horses, because gait and movement is so important to them. And obviously Farrier has a huge effect on them. So I kind of found my way into that, and just got this itch, watching those guys and how they ride and what they require. They truly are athletes. 3-4 years of shoeing for that. Then I got invited then, because obviously I was shoeing horses that were on the team. So Team GB were then looking for guys, practitioners, to come in to effectively then do some of the talent pools and things like that. So you've got the main squad, which was Haydn at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another guy called Brendan Murray, who was an amazing farrier. And they looked after the show jumpers and the dressage and the eventers when they went away to competitions.
Right.
But obviously below that tier of 8 riders, there's 20 riders. So I started getting involved with those. And again, that was amazing, because from a farrier perspective, we drive around in our vans and we interact with our own customers. But suddenly when you get pulled into like a multi-tier, a multi-practitioner practice,
Mm-hmm.
and you're all looking at how horses can be helped. And it was at that point where Team GB basically came out of nowhere. We were pretty average in the performance horse stakes. We had good show jumpers and good eventers, but, it was odds ones. And then the whole, I don't know if you remember, but marginal gains with Team Sky, the cyclists.
Yep. Oh, yeah. I've heard that story.
And that was applied then to the equestrian team. And at that point, I just started helping, and suddenly I just became totally awe-inspired by this whole thing of, 5 things at 3% to 15%, and when you've got teams sat there, 4 teams within 1% of each other at a national championship or an international championship, those little margins of how that shoeing can help
make that difference.
So I did the Team GB, and then so I qualified in 2003. Come down 2012, when the Olympics came to London, I was asked if I would be there. Obviously, I had Jim Blurton, who was the head farrier for the games, and Jim couldn't do the whole commitment, because obviously you've got a month of the games and then a month of the Paralympics afterwards. Right. And Jim, at that point, I just had so much on, he couldn't commit to that last bit. So I was invited. Would I be interested? Because obviously the people that are involved had seen Team GB, because it's the British Organising Committee, and they asked if I would be the head farrier for London for the Paralympics, which was a huge honour.
No kidding.
I had an opportunity then to, again, sort of apprentice to Jim, and spent 6 months planning what we were doing and how it's working. So effectively we were running the farrier department for the Equine hospital for the Olympic Games. So probably about 25% of the teams bring their own farriers.
Right.
And then the rest of them effectively then use the Olympic Commission's Equine hospital. So the farrier perspective, we're there to support the teams that don't have farriers, or even sometimes if the team farrier doesn't know, has a problem and they're not sure, we're there to kind of end up supporting him if we need to.
Right.
So, they can always refer it on. So yeah, I sort of learned, again, working with Jim. Jim has a big multi-farrier practice. So worked with him planning and that. And then was really fortunate. Rio came up and we were invited again, because in Brazil, when you've got that level of horse turn up, the people running those departments need to, one, be a face that those international riders
recognize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then secondly, you've got to be able to have that experience, so you understand actually what a dressage horse at that level has to do,
Mm-hmm.
what an eventer at that level has to do, and a jumper. And even though they might be on the same surface, like a jumper and a dressage horse, actually what they need from their shoeing is so specific.
Right.
And then on top of it, a lot of those horses, when they get there, like all the top level athletes, are managing injuries.
Yes.
So the skill is not necessarily putting the shoe back on in 2 minutes, but it's actually that horse has got a slight tweak of a check ligament, or it may have overreached and bruised a heel, or it may have busted a little bit of a crack at the coronary band, and the horse has got to trot up to get through in 8 hours. So what do we do?
Right.
To make sure that the horse is safe and, is healthy, but actually that doesn't become a limitation that affects the welfare of the horse. So it's like frontier mechanics, frontier farrier. You learn a lot about yourself. And then on top of it, those riders may not speak English.
Right. So you have that barrier as well.
Yeah. So you've got to be able to find the common ground and communicate and show them a route forward, but make them feel like they're part of it.
Right.
Because obviously at that point, you're the one person that's going to stop them getting to an Olympic Games if what you do goes wrong.
Right. Yeah.
Even though the horse is not right, they're still at that point hanging on to it could be okay.
Right. I wanted to take you back to what you were saying about the marginal gains.
Mm-hmm.
I've found that concept really interesting. And I interviewed Adam Farr from the American team last year. He was in Calgary, and he talked a lot about that. And it's something he's really incorporated into his business. So what were some of the things, the little marginal things that you guys would do that you found made those differences? Can you point to some examples?
Absolutely, yeah. So I don't know if you've ever met Renata Weller. She's just gone out now to University of Calgary. She's an amazing woman, Professor Renata Weller, and she'd be worth a podcast.
Yeah.
So she was quite heavily involved in the Royal Veterinary College over here and set up the degree course where all the farriers were coming and doing it. She hit some amazing stats where, for your average horse, if you look at an X-ray of an average horse's foot, for every 1 centimetre of toe that is too long for that horse, which you can only truly assess on an X-ray, but for every 1 centimetre toe that's too long, it's the equivalent of 50 kilos of intrinsic weight on that horse's back.
Right.
You've got those horses where you might have 3/8 of an inch too long, or even more. Suddenly, you can double that rider's weight.
Right.
From a farrier perspective, what does that look like? Maintaining shoeing cycles. If you think the difference between 4 and 5 weeks is 20%, every day that horse's foot grows a paper thickness of hoof. So 28 days, you've got a magazine thickness of hoof. So 36 days, it's even thicker. And we all know feet grow out of balance after about 3.5 weeks.
Right.
So maintaining your short shoeing cycles means everything stays optimal.
Right.
Again, I'm a massive analogy user, so I do apologize. But if we take the horse out of it with its personality and its lovely face and we pretend it's a car, if you have a Ferrari service is a lot quicker and shorter and more expensive and more precise than a Land Rover or a truck, or a Ford van. Well, when you start getting riders to kind of take that mystique of that's something different about a horse compared to everything else, actually bring in what are the optimal things that you can do. Shoeing cycle is probably one of the key ones. Second one is actually X-raying feet. Don't treat it as something you do when there's a problem. Forewarned is forearmed, and prehab is cheaper than rehab. Actually dealing with things when there's not a problem means you can make small adjustments and see if it gets better rather than having to make a huge adjustment when there's a problem.
Right. Do you find with hind feet, I've seen a lot of it just with horses coming in and out of my books, they tend to be long. I usually look at the hairline and it's pointing skyward. And I think because hind feet, it doesn't show like a front when it's too long. It can look like it's okay until you see it on an X-ray.
So this is my real passion. And again, I think as farriers, we're taught to concentrate on front feet because front feet are fairly consistent in how they show. So all our methodology when it comes to how we trim, how we fit and what we look to on a front foot is quite easily to standardize.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it's a relatively straight weight-bearing column with one break in angle, which is at the fetlock, but it's quite straightforward. A straight line runs through it really easily. Laterally, you can plot it really quick. So shoulder angle, past an angle, hoof angle, dead easy. The hard bit then is when you come to the hind limb, because actually the hind limb has 3 different breaks in it. So it has a break at the stifle and a change of direction. It then has another break at the hock and a change of direction. Then it has a break at the fetlock and a change of direction. And the hock and the fetlock sit caudally of the foot. So effectively now you've gone from a front leg that's like a column to a hind leg that works like a pogo stick. And each one of those joints creates friction, creates torque. And then at the same time, that whole limb, by the way it's attached to the horse in front, the forelimb's held on by the thoracic sling. So it's a series of muscles which straps that body in, and effectively the horse's body is slung between those 2 legs. So like on a chair, if you get one of those crappy garden chairs that doesn't take too much and you sit in it and the legs splay, that's how a front leg works. So that's why majority of the time, if you get a corn on a horse, it's going to be on a medial heel because the weight runs down it. And if you see a bird's eye view of the cannon bone, it's thicker medially. So all those things we kind of know, splints, generally medially in front. Whereas on a hind, if you have a corn, it's generally laterally. And if you have a splint, it's generally laterally. The main reason as well is because it's held on the pelvis mechanically, it then has to also be out of the foot flight of the forelimb. So the hind legs do have that little bit of lateral rotation, but ultimately foot balance is so counterproductive to horses' performance if it's wrong.
Yes.
That torque has got nowhere to go other than into those joints.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas on a forelimb, the muscle can absorb that, so that energy is dissipated in the shoulder. Now, over time, you'll see horses getting tight or overdeveloping on one shoulder compared to the other. But behind, I mean, it's a catastrophic sooner or later. So from a hind foot, the methodology that we are given is a tweaked version of what we do for a front leg.
Right.
But actually, the hind leg needs to have its own different approach. So from a trimming point of view, a lot of farriers, and I find with my apprentices when they start, they hold their feet really low when they're looking at it. You know, they never really understand how to position themselves under it. They kind of get comfortable and then they sort of trim from there rather than trying to get the foot in the correct place and then make their initial sort of cuts and stuff like that. Trying to get that horse as square as possible so they can see what its feet are doing.
So do you sight from when they're standing on the ground, or you will sight them in the air?
Both.
Okay, yeah.
The other thing as well, you know, from a farrier perspective is we're often not taught to look at horses perhaps as well as we should. There's lots of different foot balance protocols that you can have.
Yeah.
And the hard thing is the more you know, the more you realize how little you know.
Yeah.
For me, it's important. Static balance is key, because ultimately when that foot is weight bearing or that limb is weight bearing, that static balance is crucial to what that horse and how that placement of weight is.
Right.
But also when the horse moves, that can change completely.
Mm-hmm.
So you've almost got dynamic balance versus static balance. And then what's important about the dynamic balance is you've got to look at those horses on multiple surfaces. We all get lost in trotting horses up on lovely concrete because it does show footfall perfectly, but what it doesn't show is torque.
Right.
So when you look at your horses walking and trotting on the surface, or even with a rider on, then suddenly you see a whole heap of change. And the little lateral extension or support that you're given actually isn't as productive as you thought it was going to be. So the hind foot balance is probably the most important one of the horse to look at first than the forelimb, I find. When we go into it now and certainly what I've learned with working with the team guys is being there with the team saddler and the team vet and the team physio, how foot balance can affect saddle slip.
Yeah, you were saying that last night.
They know that saddle slip is caused by twist and exaggerated movement within the horse's rib cage. Well, that is a precursor to a hind limb instability. The one thing that you can do with hind limb stability is support with shoeing. So the more stable you can keep that hind limb, the more stable that actually the horse's body is and the more it can push in a straight line.
And does that tend to translate into more of a lateral extension than you would normally think?
It's probably more of a caudal extension.
Okay.
As farriers, we get used to what we think is a good picture from a solar view.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes when you actually step back and you look at the horse's conformation and you look at how it moves, it sort of tells you almost what you need to do, because what we're doing is reverse engineering, isn't it? So when you look at feet, and certainly with the hind limb, what we're aiming to find is that hind limb cycles and loads evenly. So there's as much weight on one side as there is on the other. So what that, in my mind, another analogy, I'm sorry, it's like a traffic cone. You want the center of the point in the middle of the base. So I want the center of my fetlock, the center of my knee, or the center of my hock to be as close to in the center of the horse's footprint as I can.
Mm-hmm.
So when the hind limb descends, I want to try and get my hock, my fetlock, my ergot to be dropping into the center of the shoe. Now, the hard bit with this is when you get on different surfaces, and this is where we go into sport specific, because what your eventer wants, galloping across through lakes and up and down and uneven ground and landing on grass, and what your dressage horse wants and what your show jumper wants are all completely different things. The one thing that when we talk about shoeing is shoe fit, and the amount of support you can give is quite different. So the slower the sport, the slower the horse, the more support it generally needs. Because instead of that horizontal velocity that the horse has got as its speed, so your eventer would be doing 11 kilometers in 8-9 minutes with 22 jumping efforts, or maybe not 8-9 minutes, maybe like 10, but with 22 jumping efforts, so 22 fences, that's really pushing on. And the horse's body shape, when it's doing it, it's not collected all the time.
Right.
When we talk about collection, the effect that collection has on the load through the hind limb is also something we need to factor into our shoeing. Yeah. So we think of a racehorse. A racehorse runs with its back straight and its head out because it's covering the ground and it's going fast in one direction. Whereas as you slow down, that horse then, it needs to arch its back and squat more. So when the horse has to squat more, so like a show jumper or a dressage horse, that's where caudal stability is key. And actually, sometimes a long toe can have a negative effect on that. So in answer to your question, like, what do you see with feet? I think the one thing we try and do is try and give as even width and length as we can medially and laterally. Obviously, the amount that you can stick it out by changes depending on how fast the horse moves and the terrain it's going through. But ultimately, trying to keep those feet, those heels as level as you can and shoe that foot to be square in line with the hock and the fetlock gives you your best chance of soundness and maintaining stability under load.
Right. Now, with those horses that you're mainly dealing with, dressage and jumpers, there's a lot. I don't know if it's here, but back home, suspensories are a big problem. Do you think a lot of that stems from not having enough support out the hind end, or just imbalance in that area? Or do you think it's a genetic thing?
It's a really interesting one, and I think it's multifactorial. The first thing that we have to look at is the surfaces. We now have the first generation of horses that has been born, done their whole working career and effectively retired and died on man-made surfaces. And when we look at the technology that goes into surfaces now is unbelievable. Like with Usain Bolt, when he runs on a track, that asphalt or that tarmac is tuned. So effectively, it has to be of a certain ability to give a certain frequency of vibration. So as the foot comes down, the ground reaction forces come back up into the foot, and that has to be at a certain frequency. If it's too hard, it comes too quickly, and you hear of tracks that run slow and tracks that run fast.
Mm-hmm.
We have the same with horses. I think now we're seeing more standardized surfaces, it's better. But the problem is we go to competitions and those surfaces now are set as a minimum standard by the FEI. So they have a machine that goes around with a guy called Lars Ropstroff, Professor Lars Ropstroff, he measures the surface. So a bit like, a post basher that you use on the farm when he has one of those that picks it up to a certain height, he drops it, and it measures the frequency of the vibration that goes through the surface.
Oh, okay.
So they know to put more water on or to roll it a bit harder or fluff it up. So that's the first thing. So I think at competitions we're better at managing our surfaces, but I think at home, not many riders or yards have that ability or really see it as a problem. I mean, the first thing I always do when I have a client when I turn up for a client for the first time, is go and walk their surface, walk their arena, and see what they're training on. Regularly, I like to try and do it as well, just to kind of, that, feels a bit tougher or a bit deader. And then suddenly you realize, well, you might have some more quarter cracks coming, or, those sorts of things.
Right.
So
Yeah.
first thing is don't blame yourself when there's problems that arise. I think the second thing is riders over riding horses. So I think we see a huge spike now in riders' technical ability. And even now in the UK, the level that riding club or amateur riders are competing at and the scores they're posting would have got you on a national team 20 years ago,
Right. Yeah.
However, what they're not doing is the basic fitness and work with horses. So if you think about it, a horse in the wild goes in straight lines its whole life, whereas a ridden horse, every 60 meters has to do a right angle. So we see a lot of acceleration and deceleration in and out of corners on a soft surface. And then we see a lot of riders then technically doing more skill set riding rather than fitness.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing all the tricks, but not necessarily going for a canter in a straight line or doing that sort of conditioning with the horse. The next bit that we have to look at is, from a farrier perspective, how the methodology that we approach with those guys. We see, and I myself was guilty of this. The first couple of years I was qualified, I had one brand of shoe and I went from a 0 to a 10, and because that's what I liked. However, now, you almost need a degree to stock my van, because there's, 3 or 4 different sections within each size.
Mm-hmm.
As surfaces have changed as well, and we've seen a lot more wax being added. And now we're seeing that actually wax is being dropped off and we're seeing just fibre and sand. But the slip and the grip that we're seeing, I think, and how our shoes interact with that also have a huge part to play. Things like big square toes, square section. So we've got a corner, can end up tilting that foot. And then when you look at the shoe shapes that we're putting on, with a sport horse, we want to try and have like that 50-50 split, 50% in front of the widest part, 50% behind. But yet with hind feet, farriers, because you're following the foot shape and giving it a little bit, sometimes you can end up with that almost being 60-40.
Mm-hmm. 60 to the toe.
60 to the toe, 40 to the heels. But when that horse goes into a surface and it has a rider on its back, its feet move under it a little bit. And then as the rider then asks for collection, so effectively it asks the horse to go into a half squat, because when it's in collection, that horse then is loading its hindquarters a little bit more. So it means that the horse is lighter in front, so it can turn and it's much more agile. 60% of horses' weight goes through its front feet and 40% goes through its hind feet. But when you're asking the horse to be collected, you're swapping that round.
Because it's so far underneath.
Absolutely. So we go back to that thing of, then suddenly you've got a limb that has a mechanical attachment to the horse's body that has to have a lateral rotation on it, going into a half squat. Suddenly you can see why you get suspensory failures and things like that. So I think from a farrier perspective, it's just understanding the surface interaction we're having on a man-made surface as opposed to on the grass.
Right. I had a dinner with Dave Farley one time.
He is an amazing guy. I'm going to be embarrassed myself now because I actually met Dave Farley at Cincinnati. I listened to your podcast with him about 3 times before I'd even thought of, being on the association or anything. Yeah, I just thought, what an interesting guy. And I met him at Cincinnati and I think I embarrassed myself, like fangirled all over him, but he's such a nice guy.
He is, yeah.
But yeah, he's definitely one of those guys that he's always thinking.
Yes. And one of the things that I got out of our conversation, he was talking about the wax. When at the time, I think there was a lot of wax.
Huge amount, yeah.
Yeah. And that having a wider section, which is what we were typically aiming for because we saw it coming from Europe, that the wider the surface, it was more almost like pencil eraser on pencil eraser. So is that kind of the theory that you have or that has been predominant here? That because you were talking about like the rectangular section, how do you feel it plays out in the footing, especially now that maybe there's not as much wax in it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it definitely has. I think like all things, we evolve and then everything changes and then we've got to sort of change. I think we're seeing definitely in Europe now less and less wax. I mean, wax is always favoured by the venues because it takes less maintenance.
Right, yeah.
But actually, it gets hard real quick, gets rutted really easily as well. For me, probably in the last 10, 15 years, my yards have tend to have less wax. So actually we're back to that sort of wider section of shoe, thinner.
Right.
So I'd be using inch 5/16, 3/4 5/16, a lot more predominantly.
Okay.
I do think you have to be careful with aluminium shoes. And this is certainly I see from when I've done games. So like in different surfaces heat up differently. So when I was working at Tokyo at the Olympics there, we saw heat affecting some of the aluminium shoes much
Really?
more. And pads. Yeah, pads got, when the horses were coming out the school when they were working, horse working for 35, 40 minutes in 35-degree heat, you could barely hold those shoes in your hands. And then horses with leather pads on, then they're throwing water over them, and then they're drying out, and those leather pads were going like banjo strings, and the packing was moving quite a bit under them.
Oh, okay.
Our whole shoeing packages, how they are affected by the surface, are a really interesting one. I think sometimes aluminium can be too sticky.
Yeah.
You get too
Because
much
it's
grip.
porous.
Yeah,
and-
yeah.
So as a pad, then, would you suggest synthetic so that you don't have that issue with the leather?
Yeah.
With hydration?
I know it's one of your questions. I think different pads for different reasons, but predominantly now, I use a lot of hybrids. So leather on the foot, plastic on the surface, and they tend to billow less. They tend to stretch less and hold together, and actually probably keep your shoes on a bit tighter.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I've only ever used one pair, the one that Jonathan Nunn gave me.
He's got you. You're hooked.
Yeah,
He's a bad man.
yeah, I'll have to get some more, maybe while I'm here.
Definitely.
Yeah. So as far as heel extension, so this is another thing that can be quite contentious in the US, where the idea of support, caudal support, they believe that
It's a negative.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting one. I had this conversation with one of the guys that works for me. When you hear people say length crushes heels, it does. But that's only if it's used incorrectly. So it's like, medicine is bad for you if you don't actually prescribe the right medicine. So I think the biggest thing it comes down to is that generally is in relation to hind feet. So when your toe is too long, when I say long, it doesn't necessarily have to mean out the front. You can actually have a foot that when you pick it up, it isn't too run forward, but there's a depth of foot at that toe. So it's really important to find the apex of your frog. It's really important to actually know what the angle of the sole is doing as it comes up. And I think you have to do your foot mapping correctly, because in that 50-50, when you're trying to add it, if your toe's too long, it then means you have to put too much heel out the back.
Right. Yeah.
So actually, the whole seesaw is wrong.
Right.
But when you get the seesaw right, it doesn't have that effect. But your toe length has to be correct. The length of the horse's foot and the trimming of the horse's foot is as important as the length of heel that you're going to stick out.
Right.
So too much toe means that horse's foot is already walking on its heel too much. So you adding length to it is only going to make it worse.
Right. Okay. And do you find, so are you setting hind shoes back considerably, or you're just through the trim?
It depends on the sport and depends on the speed. So a horse that's moving a lot slower isn't running on the tip of its toe. So if I asked you now to go and do a sprint in the car park, you would be running off your big toe, and you would be pushing forward. Yeah. And your whole head, your whole body would be leaning forward because you're driving behind. But if I asked you to slow down suddenly and jump a chair, which we'll try in the bar later on.
Okay. Yeah.
But if I asked you to jump that chair, your weight would shift back, and you then start jumping off the balls of your feet.
Right.
And then if I asked you to stop and run on the spot, you'd be running with a different part of your foot. So go back to that thing of, the mechanics of the shoe can help in the mechanics of the gait. So with your dressage horses, they don't want as much toe as perhaps your eventer that's going to do 8 or 9 or 10 kilometers across multi-surface grass and needs to be able to cover that ground, or the racehorse.
Right.
So I will set shoes back, and I probably have, I don't necessarily trim them back hard, but I probably just change my toe shape a little bit more. So for my eventer, I might be a little bit fuller in my toe, whereas on my dressage horse or my show jumper, I might be a little bit bolder. But I'll just round the toe off accordingly.
Right.
So I don't compromise the trim. It's effectively within the shoe.
Right. You're still trying to maintain a toe shape. It's not just a blunt
Correct. Yeah.
toe. Yeah. Because that became quite popular in my area for a while. And
this is the bit where we sometimes, you constantly, when you're shoeing horses, you're between the devil and the deep blue sea, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're measured on not how sound your horse is at the end of the year, but actually whether you kept a shoe on or not.
Yeah, that's true.
And equally, we sometimes in putting those shoes on, if you don't hit them right, you compromise the hoof capsular strength. So it's about how you can put the mechanics in your shoe rather than necessarily in your foot. So all the trims that I do are generally to the same standard and the same methodology. You might leave a little bit more sole on a horse that's going cross country in the summer or something like that, whereas your horse that works on a surface doesn't have anything to exfoliate it like you would do with a horse that, you know, is running on grass.
Right.
But I'll probably put more grinding into my shoe. So I'd probably bevel my toe a little bit more on a hind foot for a horse that's working on a surface. You know, all those sort of little things, again, go back to the five things at 3%, 15%. So, but trying not to compromise my capsular strength. So where I have a shoe that's set back under, be it a quarter clip or be it a hind foot, I'll round the toe into it. I won't dress it back to the shoe.
Mm-hmm.
And leave that integrity in that hoof capsule.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay. Well, before we go into the short answer questions, is there anything else you'd like to discuss?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? The Farrier sort of side of stuff. I think in the last 15 years, Farrier's changed so much. What I'm really excited by is the fact that there are farriers now that are able to do case studies and actually quantify what they've done. I think probably one of the biggest things that's helped Farrier is Facebook, because suddenly we are all able to see each other's work, whereas before you only saw who was in your area.
Right, yeah.
And the hard bit is that sometimes I think if you're a clever person, after a period of time, you stop asking questions and you start justifying. And that's where your shoeing hits the ceiling.
Yeah.
And for me now, what I love is the fact that, you know, we are all so connected and we can see each other's work. And I think what's brilliant is, you know, farriers have access to gait analysis. We have access to X-ray mapping software where we can actually quantify what it is we're doing. And I think that's the exciting thing. And I'm excited that actually farriers becoming that profession now, that actually we're owning it, you know, and the veterinarians and the physiotherapists, you know, they're starting to actually realize that what they have in their book is a case study of one particular type of horse that had something that worked for them. Doesn't mean it's going to work on everything. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the one thing I'm excited by, is seeing now how farriers are able. I mean, you look now, we've got 3 doctors, 3 guys that have got their PhD in farrier.
Right. Yeah.
That's what an amazing achievement for an industry,
mm-hmm.
you know. And I think we're seeing more guys do their degree. We're seeing more guys do their higher exams and look for certification. That's got to be a win for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. As you were talking there, I thought of the other thing I wanted to ask you, or just dig a little deeper on, because I feel like I made a similar choice. You were saying you were competing, and then once you got the Olympic horse bug and that higher level performance horse, you had to go all in on that. That became the dream I chased as well. And then I felt I didn't have enough foundation. Like, it sounds like, well, of course, in England, your foundation is already fairly solid by the time you're qualifying. You have a lot of the basics sorted, and then it becomes what you learn from the masters you work with. But I felt like I was chasing that dream, but didn't have those foundations again that you would have started with. In chasing that dream, it's just, what do you think caught your drive to go in that direction?
Again, it goes that thing of like, probably a little bit of the engineering sort of aspect. I'm a problem solver and I like to be a member of a team. That's the other thing. I believe in leaning on other people. Yeah, it was that realization one day that I was there shoeing and thinking, I know this because I've got my exam, I've got my diploma, so I know what I'm talking about. And then actually you listen to a physiotherapist talk and you listen to a vet talk. And I remember watching Haydn talking about how we can help this or help that. So, for example, you've got a horse that has a canter pirouette where the horse comes in and it sits on its haunches and it turns right. And the idea is that its hind feet keep itself in a circle. And those hind feet shouldn't move out the circle. And if it does, then that's a mark down. And it should maintain the same rhythm as it comes round. And the horse was getting significantly better marks on one side to the other. So its left canter pirouette was much better than its right. And then Haydn shot it. And then we went away, and then we came back the next time, and the rider was like, what a difference. What a difference. And you think, wow, how did he do that? And that was the bit where I realised it was kind of like, I was a qualified mechanic, but I'd never switched the car engine on and taken it for a spin up the road.
Yeah.
So that it was only ever parked on a ramp, and I did all my work with it cold.
Mm-hmm.
That's that bit where I realised I didn't know anything. And actually, that horse is meant to compete, and that horse is meant to be able to be sound. What do I need to do? And I think that was the pivotal moment for me where I go, right, I need to learn about this. And I think that's where we need to kind of get back to. That thing of, the competition world, I hear you talk about it. I think it's a great phrase, the hammerheads versus the grindersmiths.
Yeah.
And I think, each of them does an amazing job, but they're all looking with a different ruler. One's in millimeters and one is in imperial. It's understanding what it is you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But for me, I think, and that's probably where the Olympic sort of works comes in, and that bit of, because it's that being the biomechanist and understanding how things work and how you can improve them and make them better, make those gains. And I'm very fortunate. I have a really good practice now in where my forge is, and we do a lot of performance horses and also a lot of referrals that come in for performance issues, like my horse is struggling turning right, because it's got high-low syndrome. What can I do to help it? Or that poor performance, that loss of performance. And I think, the challenges that it throws up are just amazing. And you can never beat it, ultimately.
Yeah.
It's like a game of chess that never ends, And sometimes you go 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and other times you go 2 steps back.
Right.
It's one of the few jobs that you can be creative and you can be an artist, because you're making something visually,
Mm-hmm.
but you've also really got to use your head and problem solve. And I think that's probably where I quite like it.
Yeah. No kidding. You are developing through all of your experiences at the levels you're dealing with them at. You're accumulating all of these experiences that some people will not necessarily ever get. But it's interesting. There isn't a textbook that covers that stuff.
Not yet.
Yes.
Not yet. And that's where I think, things like hoofbeat and again, some of the opponent stuff that we're seeing now on the market. I have a hoofbeat system myself, formerly known as Workman Black. It is amazing what that quantifies and shows, and that you can track those changes.
Mm-hmm.
This is the bit now where we as a profession, and I call it a profession because I think we are,
Oh, yeah.
need to document that, because that's how vets understand, and that's what physios understand, that when it's a paper, it's fact. Whereas when you just, talk about it over a cup of coffee or leaning on the side of the van, it's your opinion.
Yes.
When you start showing evidence of what it is you've done, I've had horses that have come in, not lame, but unlevel, mechanically unlevel, and you manipulate their shoeing, by the most common one is putting brake over on front feet, putting that slight roll on the toe. We know the difference it makes when we put on a pair of trainers versus a pair of boots, how much easier it is. Or packing, shoeing hind feet a little bit longer so the horse actually is more stable, putting a little bit of packing in the feet, and how packing works differently. There's an amazing one. The difference that dental impression will make to some feet and how it won't work on others. But actually, soft pack will do a far better job on some feet.
Right.
Each comes with a negative, but understanding it. So like dental, it is like an inner sole for you.
Right.
It only works when you're standing on it, and you've got to have a pad over the top of it, and it does stretch and it does below and stuff gets in under it, but you can put your cup of soft in.
Mm-hmm.
But soft pack has far more effect on horses dynamically, because it effectively becomes like elastoplast. So it sticks one, like a bungee, it sticks one heel to the other heel. So it brings tension into the back of a hoof capsule.
Right.
So suddenly you can actually give a horse, a foot, far more elastic stability.
Right.
With a soft pack
Mm-hmm.
than you can with dental impression.
Right. I have never thought of it that way.
And also for a horse with a bit of counter rotation in P3, where you've got that negative palmar solar angle, you put your dental impression in, and you need to have that shoe set up in the right way to be able to give you that positive. What the dental does then is actually you can't overfill it, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
because as it's going off, then it all squirts out the back.
Yeah.
So it effectively harmonizes the volume that it wants in there.
Right.
However, it won't actually, it'll get to a point where you'll get it into a position, but you can't lift it any more than that.
Right.
Whereas with soft pack, you can actually add that in and it goes off. So actually you will maintain a far more positive palmar angle with soft pack than you will with dental.
Right. Because it isn't getting squished out.
Correct.
You let it set up. and
Correct.
then- yeah.
Correct.
It does make sense.
I don't know how we got onto that.
That's the joy of these conversations.
But the hoofbeat, go back to the hoofbeat. It's taught me amazing. So like, I'm seeing horses' stride lengths increase by anything between 1 to 15 centimeters.
And there's your 5% right there.
Straight there. And I'm getting, I had one rider a couple of years ago tell me I saved her £1,500 because her horse didn't need medicating since we put those bar shoes on. It hasn't had to have its coffin joints medicated.
Really?
The other things that it ended up routinely having, when you can then give a value as to how that happened and not just put it down to, it was a bar shoe. No, it's actually the trim. And you can quantify how the foot landed differently, how it recycled differently, and all those things come into play. It's so powerful. It's so powerful.
Cool. Well, I'm glad I asked that question then. This is the Stratum Tectorium. Short answer questions brought to you by Out West Design and Fabrication. Your choice for Farrier rigs. Out West has decided to extend their $500 off a new rig rebate until the end of March. Just mention that you heard about it here to receive your discount. Conditions apply. The link will be in the show notes. The first question, favorite book?
I'm not a massive reader. I do read, but most of mine are Audible, which I listen to a lot of Audible books when I'm traveling.
Same here.
So I think probably the best book I've ever listened to or read is a book called Winners. And again, it comes back to my my team member mentality for performance. It's basically written by a guy called Alistair Campbell. And I really recommend it to anyone out there who's interested. It's effectively about people in sport and business that have achieved and succeeded and what their secrets were. Yeah, and it hit me amazing. There's a thing in there about visualization. You need to visualize what it looks like before you make it. Otherwise, you never know what that's like to get there.
Right.
There's a bit, he talked about a basketball team. And the basketball team, they broke them down into 3 in pre-training before the season started. They had one group where they made them come in for 2 weeks and shoot hoops. They had another team that they brought in. They made them think about it. And they had another team that they said, don't worry about it. And they brought them in. And it was like the guys that had been physically practicing were 40% better than they were normally. The guys that had visualized it were 30% better. So actually, the power of that visualization.
Head still, yeah.
Absolutely. So, even without lifting the hammer, just thinking about how you're going to shoe that horse makes such a difference.
Yeah.
And that for me. So, yeah, Winners.
Okay. Sounds right up my alley. Favorite brand of nails?
Mustad. I've just moved on to some Mustad nails. I used another brand for some time and had a lot of problems with them. And then I've just gone back to old school Mustads. And do you know what? They clench up real tight. They look good. And they're hard as nails, literally.
What shoe sizes do you generally have to stock the most of?
2s and 3s in Kirkart. So probably 13, 12 and a half, 13, 13 and a half would be my general. So most of my horses are warm bloods, all sort of 16, 17 hands. So
favorite make of rasp?
Boring, green tang. Yeah.
Dream Farrier rig?
I like the one I've got. I just need to give it some love now. She's about 5 years old. A good friend of mine called Ed Robinson, he gave it a bit of an overhaul this summer, made such a difference. All those drawers that swing open while you're driving down the road, you end up getting really angry because you can hear that rattling as you're driving. So I've got a VW Transporter, a 4-wheel drive one, so it doesn't slip or move. And yeah, I've got that kitted out, and yeah, I love that. I think the beauty with the van is you open the door and you're ready to go, and you don't have to lift anything into it.
Mm-hmm.
And the roads that we have in the UK are far smaller than you guys in North America, so trailers don't really work for us over here, but vans are much easier.
I just got a van.
Oh, welcome to the club.
I've embraced it, yeah. Favorite type of bar stock to work with?
It's got to be 7838 concave. I think it's beautiful. Forger's a beautiful heel.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially for the types of horses you're working on. You probably see those shapes, right?
Yeah.
Favorite type of rounding hammer?
This is an interesting one. I got invited to judge and to speak at the Brazilian Farriers Association competition and seminar in Porto Alegre earlier on this year. And I went out, and one of the main sponsors there was a guy called Wagner Rocker, and he gave me one of his hammers and to use in the demo, and it was just amazing. It's kind of like, I like a wide face for fitting. Obviously, if I'm forging, then I'll have a taller hammer, like a Derek Gardner, or I've got a cat's head, which is an old school hammer I ground up when I was an apprentice. But I think if you're fitting, you don't need such a heavy hammer, and a bit of a wider face just gets you out. He gave me one of his hammers, and it's like a Bruce Wilcox, but bigger and wider, and just, oh man, it's hard, and it drops, and it recycles, and it's just beautiful. So I'm trying to get him to come over here to Focus next year. But yeah, anyone have a look at him online. He's brilliant.
Okay, cool. I have not heard of those. Favorite pastime after work?
I'm really into hunting. So you guys call it hunting, we call it shooting. So I do a lot of deer stalking and bird hunting, pheasant shooting. And I really enjoy shooting and just getting away from horses. It's hard, isn't it, to sort of try and get that bit of time.
Mm-hmm. It's important.
Yeah. So shooting and spending time with my fiance, because that's nice. She has a very busy job. So we don't really, the week is kind of a bit of a like ships in the night. So
right,
getting to kind of stop and decompress and
spend some time together
and chat. Yeah, it's lovely.
What's next on your bucket list?
Probably getting married. I got engaged last year, and that's probably the next thing. Yeah.
Favorite brand of keg shoe?
I love a Kirkart, and I'm a bit sad to say that they've discontinued some of my favorite shoes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Century, the old school Century, I thought was beautiful, and it's just been tweaked a little bit now. But I love that original one. So like probably a Century Support. I really like those, or a GP with a bigger lateral heel.
Mm-hmm.
Quite like the Mustad Liberos as well.
Okay,
so they're a nice shoe.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot today, actually. Ideal number of horses to shoe all around in one day?
On my own or with someone?
On your own.
Probably 3 or 4. I think, you know what, if it comes down to money, doesn't it? It's if money's not a problem, then I'd say, yeah, 3 or 4. That gives you enough to do and gives you long enough to do it. That's the biggest problem, is we put a time constraint in, rather than, we should be a bit more like the trade, shouldn't we, where we charge by the hour, not by the job.
Right, yeah. What knives do you use?
So I have got a Dusky Forge loop knife, which I love dearly. I absolutely love that. And then I've just got an Anvil knife called The Knife, made by Anvil.
Right.
And it's cheap and cheerful, but the angle on it is beautiful. It cuts and it sharpens and it stays sharp. And yeah, I love that.
What more can you ask for?
Exactly.
Favorite anvil?
I've got 2. Well, I'm a bit of an anvil collector. So I've got 5 anvils in my shop. One I won't let anyone use just because I like looking at it. I've got one of those Plymouth ones. So it's got like two beaks, 2 horns, but one's flat and one's round.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite. But my ultimate favorite is a Coleshewer. I got a Coleshewer when I first qualified, a big shop anvil, and I love it dearly. And no one's allowed to use that other than me. And then in the van, I've got a Future, the half aluminium and steel.
Yeah.
And again, I love that because it's a big anvil. So it feels like a shop anvil,
but it's not heavy.
But nothing falls off it. Yeah. But it's lovely. And I think noise is the other thing. Was the downside of being a farrier out on the road is you stick your head in your van and you've got your grinder going, and the noise became a big thing.
Yeah.
So that, and the anvil, it really goes through you now. So having the half aluminium, half steel made such a difference.
Right. Favorite inspirational quote?
I've got a few. Winston Churchill. This sounds really typically British now, but I have it as a one that I look at on the wall. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. And I think for the team stuff that I do, that's what it is you're trying to achieve. It's and enjoying that journey on the way there. And then the other one was a Winston Churchill one, which says something about the outside of a horse that's good for an inside of the man.
Of a man, yeah.
And then the last one is, the higher the monkey climbs, the more you can see its arse. So I always keep that as in the back of my mind. It doesn't matter how clever you think you are. You've got to bring people with you.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one. If you're stumped on a case or need backup, who do you call?
I'm very fortunate. I've got a few people I call. There's Greg Elliott, who's the Team GB Farrier for the eventers.
Mm-hmm.
Greg and I have really good chats, and sometimes you just need someone to bounce off, don't you?
Yeah.
If I do this, what do you think? And you want them to go, oh, what? Don't even, or just like, yeah, that, or what about that? Or so Greg's a good one. Haydn.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hayd's like the sort of, I think your old boss becomes like your sort of half uncle, don't they? So I'll ring Haydn up. And then Ian Hughes, who's the para dressage team farrier.
Okay.
And Ian and I are good friends, and Ian works for Liverpool Veterinary University, and he's one of the lecturers there, and I'll pick his brains on stuff as well. So yeah, I'm very fortunate.
Yeah. Good collection of phone to friends.
Yeah.
Do you have a Farrier Terrier?
No. My spaniel passed away a few years ago, and I've now got I bought a Labrador puppy who's lovely, but unfortunately she is too big to fit in the van. And now she spends the whole time with my other half, and actually she's pretty much just adopted her. So I'm terrier-less at the moment, but
okay.
I'm keen to get one.
Yeah, they are good company, aren't they? Do you have a favorite shoe or package for a mystery lameness?
Yeah, I think probably I would say it would be a heart bar with a bit of packing under.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is because actually most of the time, a lot of feet just need a little bit more stability and a little bit more support, and they just need a bit of the stress taken out the heels.
Yeah.
And it's surprising how sound things can get just by putting that on and stopping that ground reaction force going in, up and into the heels, a little bit of cushioning, a bit like you and I putting on a decent pair of boots or a pair of trainers.
Right.
With some nice socks. It's amazing how much better you feel.
Yeah.
It might seem a bit complicated for some people, but I think sometimes feet just need that little bit extra sometimes to be able to come back down.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. What type of planner or agenda do you use, or diary?
Yeah, diary. We're in the UK. So I do have a diary, but I use I say it's a diary, it's a calendar on my iPad.
Oh, okay.
There's 5 of us in the business, so we all have different calendars that are running. So it's the only way that I can kind of keep an eye on what everyone's doing. It works across all our phones, so everyone can see where they are and what they're doing. So I use my iPhone and my iPad. I've used the iPhone and the iPad since it came out in like 2010.
Early adopter.
Yeah, I just saw it's the way forward. It really is.
Right. I've always struggled with it. I keep trying, but favorite method of soothing aches and pains?
Single malt and ibuprofen in that order.
So I guess maybe that answers what your favorite drink is?
Yeah, probably single malt, a decent scotch, or nice British bitter.
Oh, okay.
We should get you introduced to them later in the bar, Brian.
Uh-oh. Sounds like a dangerous night. Do you have a favorite song?
I listen to a lot of country.
Okay, really?
I'm one of those guys that sort of, I'd love to be able to be cool enough to wear a cowboy hat, but over here you just get looked at like you're a weirdo. So I listen to a lot of country. So I really like Frank Foster, Blue Collared Boys.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good old proper guitar and sing out loud in the van, and then have to get out and be sensible men again.
Right. Do you work out?
No, I did, and then I had to stop because I got a bit of a disc problem, so I haven't been able to do anything for a couple of years. But I've just had a load of medication done at the start of the year, and I'm much better, so I'm hoping to start again. But it did make such a difference. Definitely, energy levels and concentration levels. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What would you have been if not a farrier?
I don't know. I mean, there's times where I always wish I could do something else. I love working with people. I love being challenged, and I love challenging and problem solving. So I don't know what jobs there would be out there that give you all. I think for me, it is my dream job.
Right. Yeah. And then the COVID question: if you were stuck in the shop with somebody for a month, who would you want it to be?
Probably my fiance. That sounds so loved up, doesn't it? But we don't see each other often enough.
So that'd be a good month.
Yeah. Do you know what? We laugh so much, and I think that's the bit, isn't it? We all take ourselves quite seriously, but she's amazing and she puts up with me. I don't know how she does. So yeah, I think probably by the end of the month, she might not want to spend the month with me, but right here and right now, that's
would be
what
nice.
You'd say.
Yeah,
definitely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I know you're a busy man this weekend, so appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. It's been a huge honor to be interviewed by you. Thanks, Brian.
Before I let you go, I wanted to say how much I appreciate all the folks who have bought the podcast a coffee once and even monthly. Your support, along with that of the sponsors such as Out West Designs and Fletcher Forge and Tool, help me to keep this project going and make the podcast possible. So thank you to all of you. And while we're on the topic, I want to remind you that the FFT 100 Propane Forge by Fletcher Forge and Tool is now available in the US. I'm sure you've already heard me rave about how durable and well built these units are, but another key feature is how much less thirsty they are than many of their competitors. Since switching my rig over to the FFT, I've been visiting the propane refill station considerably less than I used to. Go to wellshod.com or contact them directly to order your new FFT 100 by Fletcher Forge and Tool. Well, as always, thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other out there. We'll talk soon.